So there's a lot of talk about struggling math students, but what about if there's a gifted math student, especially if the parents feel like their child's outpacing them a little bit? Kristen, do you have any thoughts on like resources or how to challenge that student or what to do with the gifted kid?
Definitely. I actually have been both the child in that case, and I have one of my own. I lost my mom in math in like 8th grade. She couldn't do anything after that point. Actually, both my parents. And so math for me was really, I kind of had to work through it on my own, but because I was gifted at it, it was something that I enjoyed because it's just how I think. And so on that same note, I actually have my son will be 10 in a couple weeks, and he's in 4th grade, and he's actually started pre-algebra because he's just naturally picks up a lot of stuff. And so it's important to keep challenging them and not hold them back just because, well, you're in 4th grade, so you can't do anything beyond 4th grade math. You really have to judge where your child is and what challenge they need without overdoing it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of a balance, and I'm sure as homeschool moms, that's something we have all the time, where we have to find that pushing them, but not pushing them too hard. It's good to find a curriculum that works with your child and to have somebody that they can bounce ideas off of. Gifted children a lot of times have a different way of thinking about things. And so they may not be willing to sit and do 15 or 20 problems of the same exact style because they got it after the first problem and they don't need that 700 problem reinforcement. That's not to say that they don't need some practice, and they definitely do. But they may not need to do every single problem in a section if they're already getting the concept. So I would say that's one thing to keep in mind when you have a gifted child. Another thing is sometimes asking them to write down everything when they do each problem can also be a struggle. I know my son likes to do math problems in his head, and for the most part he gets them right. So while I require that he write some problems down and show me his work and show me that he's getting the concepts, I don't require he write out every single problem because it actually almost breaks his train of thought when he's trying to solve problems sometimes if he has to write it all down. And that's not really what we want to do. We want them to be thinking conceptually and thinking through the problems. I also think students who are gifted, you can work much more on conceptual and problem solving and applications rather than just rote procedures for how to solve problems. So finding a good curriculum that supports that deeper level of thinking and challenges them is a good thing to do. As far as the path you would take, I would recommend the same path that I had gone through earlier in my presentation. I would just recommend you start it maybe a little earlier. You don't necessarily need to wait till 8th grade to have a gifted student start taking algebra. But you need to pace it at their pace. So like while my son is doing pre-algebra at the end of 4th grade, we're not racing through it trying to complete it in 6 months or 9 months. We're going to take it at his pace. So if he's struggling with a unit, then we'll slow down. If he's getting something, then we'll keep going. And that's one of those beauties of homeschooling. Mm-hmm. And so I think you also should be aware too that a lot of algebra and above requires abstract thinking. And in order to do the abstract thinking, your brain has to actually physically be developed and able to complete abstract thinking. In the lower grades, when they just learn the basic operations, addition and subtraction, their brains have to be ready, but not in the same way as to think about X as representing every single number and how rules apply without actually knowing what numbers we're talking about or exact situations that we're talking about. And so if you find that your student starts a program and they're doing okay and then they hit a roadblock, it may be that they're just physically not developed enough and they need to take a break for a little bit and then come back to it. And so for that reason, I would definitely recommend that you don't push your student too far through without understanding. You need to make sure that they're getting all those concepts. So even if they want to move at a fast pace, that doesn't mean that they should rush through without really deeply understanding the concepts that they're learning.
Yeah, and I just want to add one other thing here, because I think it's important that you balance, frustrating a child because they can do things very quickly in their head. But as a teacher of Algebra 2 and pre-calculus, but I see this very often in Algebra 2, that some of the students that I get are very gifted and they're very capable. They have a math mind. But because it has come so easily to them for so many years, they have been able to do a lot in their heads. And when they hit Algebra 2, the rubber hits the road, and they haven't developed some of those skills that they need to do the more difficult problems. So things like writing down the problem. So it's really important that they do understand, even if you don't require them to write it down for every problem, that they do understand how to do it as written work and step by step, instead of being able to manipulate things in their head to just give you a numerical answer to a problem. And I see this very, very frequently. And the smarter the student, or the more math-oriented the student, oftentimes the harder time they have when they get to Algebra 2, and sometimes pre-calculus. Sometimes they're okay through Algebra 2, and then they hit pre-calculus, and that's when they struggle. So it is important that you work on not just concepts, but skills too. So there's a balance, and it's definitely a trickier situation when they are gifted and not.
And I would say, regardless of the student, whether they're gifted or not, a good skill for them to have is when they get answers wrong, to go back and see where they made the mistake and let them figure out where they went wrong. Obviously, there may be times when they can't figure out their mistake, but you should give them an opportunity to look back through their work and see if they can find their own error, because it will stick much more in their mind if they find their error, rather than you just say, well, you missed step 5, or something like that they may not pick up on if it's not something that they found themselves.
Yeah, I think all that's great. The only thing I was going to add is I know sometimes math competitions can help as well, like Math Olympiad, Math Counts, AMC 10. I remember watching a documentary on the International Math Olympiad, kind of realizing like the sky is the limit. Like, no matter how smart your child is, there are teams out there that will challenge them.
Yes.
So there are some outside competitions and groups.
Robotics is also a really good one if they tend to be, system math process oriented thinkers. Mm-hmm.
I think it's good too, because then they find some more like-minded people who maybe challenge them, where
Right.
If they're around people who struggle with math all the time, then they kind of feel like, well, I've got this and I know it
Right.
all. And so when they finally meet somebody who can do problem number 3 faster than them or a different way than them, it kind of gives them a reality check that they still have things to learn. And just because it naturally comes to them, that they need to learn coping skills for how to pick up on things that they don't just naturally get.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember one of my professors telling me that like all great math discoveries are normally made before you're 30 or something like that. And he was like, you're already behind. So I always tell the high school students that I'm tutoring, like, there's a time crunch. Get through this math so you can discover something.